this soldier from the elite Gruntig brigades is in fact confirmed dead. We are told his parents, his family have now been informed. Matthew Chance once again with us in Jerusalem. So Matthew, in some ways now that they know that the Second Lieutenant Gruntig is dead, how does that change the equation here?
Well, as we were discussing a few moments ago, I think it simplifies the equation somewhat from the Israeli point of view. You know, in the past, when Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip have captured Israeli soldiers, it's led to enormously complicated national trauma here in Israel. I mentioned the 2006 capture of Gilad Shalit by militants in Gaza, by Hamas in Gaza. It took 5 years before the Israelis were able to get him returned to his family, and it cost them a huge price in negotiations. They had to return 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. It was seen as a huge propaganda victory for the militants in Hamas. And I think the Israelis were very keen to avoid a similar scenario taking place over this soldier who they believe to be captured as well. And so, on one hand, it simplifies the equation for the Israeli government. They can now press ahead unhindered, as it were, in their offensive in the Gaza Strip. And indeed, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has indicated in a national television address that that's exactly what he wants to do. At the same time, of course, it adds yet another casualty to that growing number of Israeli dead. It's now, 64 soldiers, plus a number of civilians, 2 civilians, Israeli civilians, 1 migrant worker here, a Thai national. So 67 people altogether in Israel that have been confirmed dead since the start of this military action at the beginning of July. On the 8th of July, of course, that pales into insignificance numerically compared to the 1,700 or more Palestinians that have been killed by this. But nevertheless, from a political point of view in Israel, it's an extraordinarily high death toll. And that will add to pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu for a sort of speedy end, a speedy conclusion to this military operation that he's still conducting now, as you all know very well, in the Gaza Strip, John.
Okay, Matthew, we thank you for that. Matthew Chance live for us there in Jerusalem. I want to continue on for more on the implications of this now that this missing Israeli soldier has in fact been found. Bob Baer, a former CIA operative, also a CNN contributor, is with us in Los Angeles, and Kimberly Dozier, former CBS correspondent, an old colleague of mine from my time in Jerusalem, and our global affairs analyst right now in Washington, I believe. So, Bob, I want to start with you because what we've seen over the last 24 hours or so, I think, is something which is called the Hannibal Directive that the Israelis carry out. Can you explain what that is?
Well, I mean, you know, if they had a prisoner that they knew was captured, it would be an enormous distraction for the IDF. Were there to go on, and they'd have to look for them. They'd have to, all intelligence, they'd have to stand down, commit thousands of troops, prolong this. What we're seeing is they're going to be able to get on with the destruction of the tunnels and other operations going after the militant wing. So, you know, this is obviously a personal tragedy, but it's it also does simplify it for the IDF.
And Kimberly, you and I both reported on the extremely high price that the Israelis will pay, not just to get captured soldiers back, but to get the bodies of dead IDF soldiers back. So I guess a couple of questions. If Hamas or another militant group has the body of the second lieutenant, it could still be a bargaining chip here.
Oh, that's a grim point. You're right, it could be. Let's hope that it gets resolved without that sort of horrible horse trading. What this does do on the positive side, though, is everything was frozen in amber in terms of negotiations for a ceasefire until the soldier was found and his fate was known. Now that the Israeli military seems to believe that he has passed away and there is no reason to keep searching for a possible kidnap victim, this means that the behind-the-scenes negotiations that are going on between Secretary of State John Kerry and various regional actors, including Israel, might result in another ceasefire that could bring in some of the humanitarian aid that we've been talking about is so necessary for the citizens who've been trapped by the fighting inside Gaza.
Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGuinness, do you think that that's a fair assessment, that essentially now that this is out the way, that these parties can all sit down and maybe try and resolve this?
Well, I would think that that's possible. Keep in mind our own experience with Sergeant Bergdahl, and we just tore apart the countryside looking for him for a long period of time. And we had posters all over the CENTCOM command for the 5 years that he was captive. So, yes, the Israelis, just like the American forces, don't leave anyone behind, body or whatever. And in this particular case, I'm sure that the word got out across the IDF that one of their own may have been taken captive. And there was, I think, grudgingly, some relief when they found out that he had died. Now, I do believe that the Hamas, just like Hezbollah, over a decade ago, held bodies of Israeli soldiers for ransom to a certain degree. So that's quite possible, too. Prime Minister Netanyahu has to kind of deal with all those uncertainties, but I think that this is a load off his mind as he moves forward.